Good morning. I hope you're all looking forward to our virtual annual meeting, June 11th, beginning at 11:45 in the morning. We've got a couple hour of live session, and then we have our committee meetings that will be meeting live virtually. In advance of that, we wanted to send out this video because it's top of mind right now for everyone, and it has to do with reopening the economy, returning to the workplace, and reinforcing health protections for our tenants and their guests. And so we have a terrific panel today to talk about all of these issues. It's going to be moderated by Tom Flexner. Tom is the global head of real estate at Citigroup. He is a member of Citi's Institutional Clients Groups Management and Executive Committee. He's responsible for directing worldwide commercial real estate activities across investment banking, commercial banking, and real estate private equity. Tom is also a member of the Roundtable Board and our treasurer. John Fish, chairman and CEO for SUFFOLK. SUFFOLK is one of the largest privately held building contractors in the country. About $4 billion in annual revenue. It's ranked number 26 on the Engineering News Record national list of top contractors. John is well known for his philanthropic work and his involvement in community and business organizations. John's also a member of the Real Estate Roundtable Board of Directors. Diane Hoskins is the co-CEO for Gensler, one of the world's largest design and architectural firms that works with many people in our industry. She leads a workforce of about 7,000 employees in 120 plus countries around the world, and we're delighted that she's joined us today. Jodie McLean is also with us. Jodie is the CEO of Edens. Edens is one of the nation's leading private owners, operators, and developers of retail real estate. She's been with Edens for 25 years, and she has established herself as one of the key players within the company's growth over that time period, and as CEO is taking them even further into the stratosphere. So Jodie is also a member of the Roundtable Board of Directors. Thank you for joining us, Jodie. And finally, we have Owen Thomas. Owen is the CEO of Boston Properties, obviously one of the largest and most well-known owners, operators, developers of Class A office in America, in all the major cities in America. And we're glad to have Owen join us. So take it away, Tom, where the topic again is reopening the economy, returning to the workplace, and refreshing and reinforcing health protections for our tenants and our workers. Take it away, Tom. Thank you very much, panel.
The name of this panel, for lack of a better word, was the reopening panel, which could apply to, Broadway as well as it could apply to real estate. But it's remarkable that we're actually, having a panel on how to get America back to work and back to shopping. And I would just preface this by saying that it's not about getting America back to work, because America's been working remotely, and we're going to be talking about that, but it's how to get them back to the office. Okay, understanding that, as I think Diane will be able to address, the majority of the workforce wants to be in the office. They prefer to be in the office. Now, maybe this has taught them that they can work effectively at home as well, and maybe they aspire to a slightly different office home trade-off in terms of days per week and so forth. But I think this is probably the number one issue that the CEOs I talk to, the tenants I talk to, average consumers are thinking about is, what is a new normal, quote unquote, going to look like? How much has behavior been altered on a long-term basis? And what are the implications for the real estate industry, particularly office, hotel, and retail. So I'd like to kick it off by asking my first question to OT, which is, how you doing? How are your properties doing? How are rent collections doing? How are tenant conversations doing? And do you have reason for optimism based on all that?
Yes, we do have great reasons for optimism, and I think we're doing well given the circumstances. Just to kind of dig into your question a little bit more, all of our buildings have remained open throughout the pandemic, but given government regulations, which has required everyone to work from home or work remotely, except for essential workers, the occupancy in the office buildings has been about 5% or less. That's starting to change. In Boston opened last week, and there's a cap at 25% occupancy. But our customers are starting to come back. I think they're excited about it. But again, the government, for very good reasons, is putting some caps on what occupancy can be. In terms of collections, we've been collecting about 97% of our office rents. So our office customers are, doing well. Our overall collections have been about 93%. About 7% of our portfolio is retail, and our retail customers are hurting more. A lot of the retail that we have is service retail, like restaurants and other amenities in our office buildings. And if there are no office workers, they really don't have much business. So we've been working on modifying our leases and providing them the support they need to get them through this crisis. I think our customers right now, they all want to come back. No one is saying we want to stay at home full time. We put together a very detailed health security strategy using outside medical experts. We posted that strategy on our website, so we've clearly given it to all our customers, but we've also provided it to the public. And the number one issue is our customers want to come back, but they want to do it in the safest possible manner.
Got it. And what sense of, take New York as an example, because obviously it was perhaps the nation's epicenter of the coronavirus onslaught. What is your sense of the timing and strategy for tenants coming back? When do you think they'll start coming back? And do you think they'll come back gradually in waves, A team, B team? What are you thinking?
Yes. Yeah, all of the above. So in terms of the New York reopening, I mean, we're in Boston, New York, DC, San Francisco, LA. The only city that's open to non-essential workers right now is Boston at lower occupancy. So today, New York opened for construction and a handful of other industries. And we don't know yet, but we're hopeful that it will open for office in the next couple of weeks, hopefully by the end of June. There again, just like Boston, there are going to be some kind of occupancy restrictions. I don't know if it's 25% or 50%. We'll have to see. All of our tenants, as well as ourselves, are prepared for this. We're working on our procedures, our health security measures that I mentioned, and we're going to be ready to welcome our customers back to the buildings. I do think another issue in New York, Tom, that you didn't mention, in addition to New York being by far and away the hardest hit city in our country, if not the world, I think the other issue is public transportation. Yep. It's a big issue in New York. A lot of the workforce uses public transportation, and my guess is after workers come back and experience the office, experience what the landlords are doing, experience what their employers are doing, I do think a gating issue that we hear about is what are we going to do about public transport? And honestly, even driving doesn't work that well because one, there's traffic, and second of all, it's not park and lock. Somebody's got to handle your car.
All of the safety protocols in your building, to some degree, if not a total degree, are under your control. Public transportation is not. And our own Citigroup surveys have also identified public transportation for New York City as a leading concern. So I agree. Now I have one last question, and then I want to move to. The last question is, over the course of conversations, OT, with your clients, the two sort of almost opposing forces that we've seen percolate up are some tenants saying more social distancing, more space per worker is going to be the new future. Our employees want it, which would argue that they need more space. And the opposing forces, of course, many employers are thinking that after this work from home experiment forced upon them for 3 months, efficiency rates in terms of productivity didn't actually take a dive. They were actually pretty well maintained. Now, Diane, I know we can get into a lot of other subjective aspects of this, but OT, I was just curious, those two opposing forces, more space per worker, which in a way could be a positive for a New York office, versus we're going to have X% maybe permanently working from home. What's your take on that?
Yeah. So the other thing I would do in addition to the two forces you mentioned, I would break up the future into two phases. First phase is what I call the virus phase. And the second phase is the virus is gone for whatever reason. So let's talk about those two things. Spacing is going to be big during the virus phase. Diane is better equipped to talk to you about what all her customers are doing, but they're all spreading out, taking out workstations. They're not rebuilding space yet, but they're definitely spreading out. I personally think they're going to stay maybe less spread out than the virus stage, but they're going to stay more spread out after the virus is gone. I think a lot of the densification that was in the market already was unpopular with workers, and this is a chance for that to be reversed. And then going to work from home, look, to deal with the government caps on occupancy and the spacing requirements, companies are going to continue to use work from home tools extensively during the virus phase. But after the virus phase, again, Diane should talk about a survey that I thought was outstanding that Gensler did.
Yes.
But not many employees want to switch to full-time work from home. Many would like to work from home a day a week, a couple days a month, but it's hard for an employer to save space with people working from home part-time, because to do that, you have to get the worker to schedule their work at home, and you have to give everybody a flexible workstation, not a fixed workstation. And I don't think that's going to be particularly popular. So I do think over the long term, these two factors are certainly going to be opposing one another, and we'll see which one is greater.
Well, I'm going to turn next to Diane. I will only say one thing about, not having unassigned seating, right?
Yeah.
The one place where that really is helpful, at least the way we're thinking, is if you're going to have a protocol of doing intensive cleaning every night. If you have unassigned seating, it means people are not leaving personal effects on.
Yeah.
And it makes it a much, much more efficient and easier and less expensive job to do the cleaning. But Diane, let's move to you. For the record, this is Diane Hoskins, not Diane Gensler. She's also on your board, isn't she, OT?
Yes, she is. Very proud.
You're a lucky man.
We are.
And so, Diane, I've seen the terrific 2020 survey you did. You surveyed a broad cross-section of employees, millennials and boomers across a dozen industries and so forth, and came up with some pretty definitive bifurcations of how different generations are feeling, and overall the sense of work from home versus work from work. Maybe you could take us through some of those highlights.
Sure. Tom, thank you. It's great to be part of this terrific conversation, because this is certainly the #1 conversation that we have been having with our clients probably since the pandemic and the quarantine started, and everyone kind of got over the first move, which was, can we work from home? And again, like everyone else, I think we all answered that with yes. And we were thrilled to be able to use these incredible technologies. In fact, at Gensler, we use these technologies all the time in the office, because we work with people that are scattered in 40, 50 offices around the world all the time. But again, I think we were all very proud of this kind of, we're working from home now, and obviously for all the right reasons. Just to kind of set a context, over the last 10 to 15 years, we've been doing surveys of US workers and actually workers around the world to understand the trends of, you know, effectiveness of workplace, productivity in the workplace, all of the dynamics that we've all witnessed over the last many years, because it's all been changing so quickly. And so once, you know, the quarantine started, we looked at each other and said, let's survey people while they're in the quarantine, and to really understand what's going on, how's it working, what are people thinking, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, again, as you said, we surveyed 2,300 workers across 10 industries, and we intend, just to kind of put this out there, we intend to do a similar survey actually as people begin to go back to the workplace. So once we're kind of in a more hybrid world where a lot of people are in, you know, the workplace and a lot of people are at home, and you're having this kind of bifurcated world, we're also going to be doing another survey. But our findings really showed very definitively that only 12% of people want to just work from home. And, you know, it was interesting because this was probably about 2 weeks after the survey, because you have to get all the data and crunch it. But what we saw in the media was this massive other conversation that was almost the opposite. And so it was, once we put these findings out, it was almost like we were being somewhat contrarian. But, you know, we really believe strongly in, you know, you got to look at the data, and it's not just about kind of opinions. Because these were office workers who had worked in the office before going into the quarantine. And so this was very much specifically the people that are in our office buildings and in our workplaces. You know, as you said, I mean, people expressed the intent, the interest, I would say, in various kinds of, gee, you know, it'd be great to be able to do this, you know, once a week, or, you know, once every few weeks, or even, gee, I'd like to be maybe more at home, but only in the office 1 or 2 days. So that mix was there, but actually that was there before the pandemic. So, you know, again, as you look at these trends, there was no break in the trends. And I think that's the important message for all of us, is that the responses we'd seen already in data that we had done, that it was about 10% versus 12%. So maybe there's a 2% increase. It was about 10% of people that were very interested in this kind of work from home as your home base.
Did you, by the way, Diane, did you see
Yeah.
any statistically significant differences across geographies or across industries? Tech versus finance as an example.
Yes, yeah. Actually, and we're actually going to be coming out with a few more reports on this study. And one of them is exactly what you're talking about, which is kind of the differences between industries. As you can imagine, the legal sector is less inclined to work from home. And it kind of swings almost, you know, more extreme in the looking to come back to the office. Tech was probably the largest, and even then it was more, I think, in the more 15% versus 12%. But again, we saw that before the pandemic itself. So there are nuanced differences, and I think it is important, and that's why we kind of saved that for, you know, kind of the part 2 that we're going to come out with. But we did see, and you know, to your point about geographies, we didn't see differences around geographies, but we did see differences in terms of the generations. And it was a surprise to us to see the response of the Gen Z and millennial cohort. And the fact where a lot of us would say, gee, they know the technology, they're really into kind of all of this work from wherever you are, that they would be the ones that would say, I don't need to ever go back to the office. And in fact, it's just the opposite. That's the group that most wants to go back. That's the group that has found the work from home the least attractive, has the most concerns, the most difficulties with, you know, knowing what's expected of you, knowing, you know, kind of time management, a lot of other things, which, you know, makes sense. and also not receiving the mentoring and the kind of learning that kind of goes on from being able to ask the quick question or be among people who've got 1 year more experience or 10 years more experience than you, that you're constantly learning from in your physical environment. So that was that was kind of surprising, but really, we believe an extremely important takeaway for companies that might be thinking about this as a longer term strategy, to really think about the implications long term for the viability of your own organization, as well as your ability to recruit into those generations.
Excellent. And a little surprising, but totally understandable as you parse through it. Survey starting in April through a portion of May, I think, as I recall. So a moment in time, how would you rank the, what are most important and least important in terms of addressing safety concerns, Diane, that your survey may have uncovered in terms of what people would expect? OT mentioned public transportation, which is obvious, but also safety protocols in elevators, lobbies, and workplaces. Did you have any real conclusions on that?
Yeah, I mean, we had people really talk about the things they were most concerned about or most interested in seeing when they come back into the office. And, the social distancing was number one, far, way above everything else. Cleaning protocols, not sharing workstations was a big piece of it. And again, the kinds of things that you would expect in terms of the spacing, the cleaning, the kinds of technologies, frankly, that we are beginning to look at, which are touchless technologies in terms of operating doors and, being able to use certain facilities without a lot of contact with various surfaces. So, spacing is the biggest piece. And then as architects and designers and working with our engineers, we also know paths of travel are going to be extremely important, and even how air handling systems work within our spaces to be able to help to keep people safe.
Thank you. And we'll get it. John Fish, who's CEO of SUFFOLK, is on the phone, and we'll get into that a little more later. Jodie, are you there? Good afternoon.
Yes. Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
As you all know, Jodie's CEO of Edens, which is a retail investment and ownership company. And, retail's obviously had a number of other headwinds over a lot of years. I mean, in some respect, the pandemic for retail started with Amazon, not with the coronavirus. So you've been fighting that headwind, now coupled with the pandemic, which has forced, for a period of, 10 weeks or so forth, many shopping centers, malls in particular, but also small stores in strip and community centers to shut down. And I'd be very interested in, now that you're beginning to reopen in markets, right, and you may be going through phased reopenings, what are the actions that you think you need to take to get people to feel comfortable in coming back into a shopping environment? What indications are you seeing that people are just anxious to come back, for the interaction, for the shopping experience, et cetera, Jodie?
All great questions. Let me just take these in order. Edens has 2,600 retailers. By the end of March, beginning of April, we have 1,500 that were mandated closed, and another 400 plus that were radically changed how they were operating. Think full service restaurants doing takeout only. So about 30% of our ABR remained open, and those retailers did well during this time. We've now, out of the 1,500 that were mandated closed, we've opened back up about 850 retailers, primarily Southeast Texas and Colorado is who we've reopened so far. And we've seen, and I think we're going to see really wide difference in the Southeast. The first week or two was a little timid, but the people who showed up were there to buy. So less people in the door, but higher tickets. That since I would say has broken loose. This last week, we had a little bit of slowdown just with what was going on nationally, the discussions, the protests that were going on. But we've seen sales now in the Southeast creep close to 85 to 90%,
Wow.
and continuing to grow, which is positive. We're still not at last year, but they're continuing to grow. Texas has been a little bit slower, but following those same general trends. Colorado, it's really a little bit too early. So we're seeing fewer people show up. When they show up, they're there to buy. I don't think this is revenge. I think some of this is pent up, and some of it is that people want to be back into finding some normality in their life. They want to be part of a community. They want to see other people. I think we'll see a much slower trend in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. In areas that have been more impacted in numbers, I think we're seeing the consumer be a little bit slower to return. Things that we're doing, some of it is obvious. We have signage throughout all of our properties, welcoming you back, loving our community, but asking you to respect personal space, asking you to respect social distancing. We have a lot of social distancing that's marked. We've taken a lot of our open air space. We're all open air, so we're not enclosed. We've converted, and we're closely with all of our municipalities to convert as much common area as possible for outdoor dining, for outdoor fitness. People want to be back. We've hired a third-party medical group to review all of our reopening to make sure we're doing the things that, number one, protect and allow for safety. We do have all the CDC regulations posted everywhere. We have hand sanitizing stations throughout all of our properties and hand washing stations to make people feel safe, but in a way where people also feel like they're coming back to humanity. That is the role that retail plays in our communities. And what we've seen is it's really vitally important. Tom, you talked a little bit about the trends. We were seeing trends beforehand. What COVID has done is accelerated. It's accelerated these trends by probably 36 to 40 months. So e-commerce obviously spiked during stay-at-home orders, but it's probably hit its 2023 level where it's going to level off now going forward. We're seeing it come back down. So I think we'll see e-commerce go from 11 to 12% to probably a 23%-ish run rate. So for us, it's an acceleration. We've seen the acceleration of, and we'll see the acceleration of the rationalization of retail. Things we saw coming into it, again, accelerated there probably by several years. We'll see that. And hyperlocalization, which is really coming out. The people want to feel a part of their community.
Sure. Thank you. That was a great overview, Jodie. And another question, you know, there's an old proverb in real estate, which is, at the end of the day, landlords can't do better than their tenants, because, and that's especially true in retail, I think, right? So you've got national tenants, you've got regional tenants, you've got local tenants.
Mm-hmm.
How hard, how deep has the pain been? What would you estimate, you know, particularly probably among the smaller local, maybe some, that they just can't recover from 3 months of negative cash flows and a very slow reentry process. And of course, you know, probably all of them are asking and have asked for rent forbearance because they don't even have access to their premises in many cases. How would you describe the pain on the tenant side?
The pain is deep. There's no question. The pain is deep between both our retailers and our landlords. We're working collectively. In April, we collected about 62% of our base rent. We'll see about those same numbers in May. June looks like it's moving up a little. I think we're not in New York. We're not in Manhattan. So we're Boston, suburban New York, DC, and then Charlotte, Atlanta, Miami, Houston, Dallas, and Denver. We think taking all of this together, we'll probably see somewhere around 10% loss of occupancy coming out of COVID. What I think is most exciting, both Friday's calls and this morning's calls, we are starting to see new lease activity, albeit slow. It's slow, but there are people who have realized, a lot of retailers who realize I need to be embedded into the community, consumer action costs, et cetera. I need my brick and mortar store. So we are seeing some new leasing activity, but we think that it could be, we were really at full occupancy going into COVID. So we think our occupancy could be hit by as much as 10%. And I think you're going to see it regionally. I think where we could reopen quicker, the retailers were able to hang on. Programs like PPP, programs like Main Street Lending are going to be incredibly important to the retail sector. And I think those where they've had to sustain longer periods of being closed, that's where we'll see larger fallout.
Great, thank you. By the way, just as an aside, you're not in New York, but I'm in the city today for the first time in a couple months, and I drove down Fifth Avenue, and it's remarkable to see all of the luxury goods stores, Saks, everybody boarded up. Now that's obviously a temporary phenomenon, and maybe at the end of this session we can talk a little bit about that other pandemic that's crossing the country, right? And there'll be other people, I think, for the Roundtable annual meeting that will address that more specifically. But thank you for all your comments. John Fish, are you on?
Yes, Tom.
Hey,
It's a pleasure to see you.
where are captains? You're not on your boat, are you?
No. Captain's practices. Everybody's working independently right now. We sent people off home to make sure they stayed in shape. Keeping the nose to the stone and come back in shape.
Excellent. Well, listen, I'm really interested in your take on the impact of the pandemic, what you're seeing as one of the leading construction companies, and maybe start by just telling us a little bit about how your business is doing. Are you beginning to see as cities reopen a restarting up of construction activity? I know today was phase one day one of phase one for New York, bringing back construction workers. So what's your sense?
Tom, overall, again, I want to thank Jeff DeBoer and the Real Estate Roundtable for hosting this. And I want to thank the other panelists. And Tom, thank you for the moderation. What I would say is, as most of us know, there was an unequal distribution of impact on COVID. We saw really in the coast, the East Coast and the West Coast, more of an impact of it. And I think we saw it more so with New York, Boston, Philadelphia, a tremendous sort of degree of uncertainty and a lot of emotional reaction. I think would put us in the situation we're in right now, where Boston specifically is one of the last cities in the country to reopen. And I do think we'll reopen very, very slowly overall. We see the Southeast and also parts of Texas, almost, the antithesis of what we saw on the East Coast. It's almost like, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, in some respects it didn't happen down there, but I think now they're feeling sort of that first initial wave and hitting them a little bit stronger. I think one of the things we need to focus on is really, we don't know whether the weather contributed to this or not, because nobody really has any data right now. And I think the next go around, if we have a second wave, data is going to help us sort through this in a very, very thoughtful way. But with respect to the industry, Tom, I would say this to you. I think it was a real wake-up call in many respects. And everybody knows over the last 7 years, we've had 5% escalation in construction prices. And that's a 30 to 35% jump in a very, very short period of time. Not sustainable. In productivity, in quality, didn't keep up with that 30 to 35%. I think everybody on this phone call would probably agree with that. I think overall, I think COVID has introduced a requirement to sort of think about how do we do faster, cheaper, and quicker at the end of the day. So we believe innovation is going to really, really, really accelerate coming out of COVID-19, very analogous to telemed in the healthcare industry. This is going to force a new artery to be opened much more quicker than has happened in the past. And also say what we're going to see is because of the uncertainty, prices starting to go down. I think people really want to understand that. I think in the next quarter, prices will, I think, stabilize. Then I think we'll see over the second to third quarters going forward a reduction in prices because, again, what we're doing overall is you're starting up, you're not starting up a $22, $23 trillion economy. You're really starting up a $70 trillion economy. And nobody knows exactly the implications of how do we provide sort of, oil in that type of large engine and make sure it runs smoothly. We just don't know. Also, I would say, like any other industry, the threats to our supply chain. And it's not just COVID right now. It's global relationships, what we're currently experiencing right now with the Cold War and trade and so forth and so on. That has impacted our industry quite substantially, whether it be curtain wall deliveries, miscellaneous parts and pieces, or electronic pieces that go into job sites. So we've got to be very, very careful about that. But probably one of the second to last things I want to say about the crisis itself, in this, we've seen this in other sort of pump ups in the economy, especially in real estate construction, is that contractors' backlog grows significantly because they're out there hunting work quite. And on average, the COVID thing has impacted contractors probably an average of 10 to 12% of their backlog, and that happened very, very quickly. So therefore, what happens at the end of the day? Well, it really turns into a cash flow problem if things stop so quickly. And a lot of contractors, I often tell people, they don't go out of business because of profitability. They go out of business because of cash flow. And the same thing with subcontractors. So there has to be a very, very keen eye on some of these undercapitalized general contractors and subcontractors, because that day of reckoning will materialize, I think, in the next 60 to 90 days, because I use a term euphemistically, it's almost like a merry-go-round. Once the music stops and you can't take payment from one job, put it on another job, and there's an empty, there's not a seat for somebody, right, it becomes problematic. And lastly, I would say, which is pretty interesting, is about our industry, is that I think most developers would agree upon that. We're investors. We're not developers. We invest. What I said, when contractors start becoming developers, you know that that's a cue there's something wrong. The development business is a very challenging business and very, very complicated with the financial engineering and the relationship building that's required. And my sense is we saw a lot of contractors starting to get involved. And I think that's the death knell of our industry overall. So I think that ship will be righted through this particular experience that we're all going through. Last thing I would say, I think there's two issues we all need to keep aware of. One, how do we manage COVID, the new norm, cost effectively and without losing productivity? And I think that's the key thing. And that's basically having a thoughtful strategy on your project of safety protocols that we can go into at a later date, which is very important, which should not cost more money. I want to be very clear about that. And secondly, what I would say is some type of opportunity to discuss with Washington, some type of PREA insurance, pandemic insurance. We've talked to some of the senators, both state and federal. We've had some very good responses. I think it's too early in the game. Jeff DeBoer's team has been involved in those. But there's no doubt in my mind, we cannot continue moving forward as thoughtfully and as aggressively as we want to as a country without some time of government assurance that if in fact, or when we do have this second pandemic, not the second wave, another pandemic in our lifetime, we have the opportunity to be protected. And I think that's at the end of the day what government is for. I'm not sure everybody would agree with me, Tom, but I do think
those are great insights, John. And I have a couple of questions. You mentioned the bifurcation in the construction industry between, the better capitalized construction companies and the ones that, when the cash flow stops for a period of time, it could be the death knell.
Yes.
And this is a question for both you and Diane, actually, because I wonder whether we're not going to see a similar bifurcation in the office landlord market, where if tenants are demanding higher safety protocols, investments in better air filtration and HVAC systems, better social spacing, elevators and so forth, the weaker landlords, who are probably by definition more leveraged, may not have the financial resources to respond to those tenant requirements, whereas the better capitalized landlords, and OT is, well capitalized, may have the financial resources to do that. And maybe you see a bit of differentiation between the strong and the weak amongst the office landlords, number one. And number two, I'd be curious, John and Diane, first of all, are you getting significant reverse inquiry into by prospective and current clients, landlords, as to how can you help us make our buildings safer from a construction and architectural standpoint? And thirdly and finally, John, you said, implementing these safety protocols can be done at no incremental cost. I don't. That sounds more theological than logical.
Let me explain that. When you think about it from the construction point of view, everybody talks about the social distancing and 6 feet. But when you really think about that, okay, there is a small cost to provide the materials that are going on the job site itself. And I'm talking about construction cost right now. But any good safety program in itself will manage this in a very, very thoughtful way. And the biggest challenge is you can stagger starts and so forth, just simple protocols. But when you start working closer than 6 feet, okay, you can wear face shields, very similar to when you're in an operating room or you're working somewhere else, that gives you safeguards against these particular things. There's also, Tom, what I would say, there's technologies out there like Triax I have right here. It's a 6-foot solution. If you come within 6 feet of people, it will beep, and the closer you get, the louder it will come off. My point in that, and I don't mean to be sort of Pollyannish about it, what I'm saying is if you have very good safety protocol, thoughtful, you train your people, upfront expense, and you have what we have, what is called a COVID ambassador, which is really a safety manager on every single job site, doing the role, not of COVID, but safety and COVID. So it really becomes integrated in the way that you conduct your business. And it's basically the new norm in our industry. Yes, there'll be a lot of clamoring for a lot of extra money and inefficiency. But my sense, if a contractor aligns himself with the developer and understands if the developer is going to get hurt by this, it's less work for the contractor. So how do you do your best from a training point of view and sort of a coordination? But let me explain one last thing from the construction business. I say this with deepest amount of humility. This has prompted us in our industry. We do about a little over $4 billion a year, Tom, okay? And we have about 140 projects going on in the country. We finding out, we did a download over the last 2 months on subcontractor supervision that we're paying for. And we're finding out we're buying subcontractor supervision out of our subcontracts, but we're not getting the appropriate supervision that's really needed at the end of the day from a ratio point of view or a managerial point of view. And that's something that we're doing a deep dive into right now, because if we bought that supervision out, how do we leverage that supervision to ensure a safer, more productive job site that everybody is aligned in a thoughtful way?
Great point. Diane?
Sure. I mean, I agree with John. I think that right now there are kind of very cost-effective ways to achieve these, I call it the belt and suspenders safeguards, whether it's, devices like what John shared, or it's the footsteps that, you put on the floor in the elevator, or the device that you have there for people to touch the buttons without touching the buttons. So I think that there's going to be a lot of that in this short-term re-entry. I think it's the longer term where your point, Tom, starts to play out, and this idea of maybe the Class A buildings and other buildings, and I think at the end of the day, we are, I frankly believe that as a community, as a society, we can't let it happen again, right? It's just not worth it. It really isn't. And so you think about, so what are the other precedents to issues like this that we've had to deal with, especially in the built environment? And fire is one of those. I mean, fire didn't go away. In fact, fire used to burn down cities regularly. And it was the major threat to every piece of real estate. And so we, again, we develop fire codes, we develop prevention, and we develop suppression. And I think ultimately we're going to start seeing these things in the better buildings. And then eventually it will make its way into the codes. I mean, there will be testing of effluent. Sorry to put it on the, on the tape, but that is one of the first indicators of contagion. There's going to be suppression through sensors. There's going to be an elimination of certain kinds of HVAC systems that spread contagion more. They're going to start, we will start to find out through this next, whatever months, what are the best ways to contain the contagion and also the cost-effective ways. And it's, a lot of you have said, gee, this has fast forwarded some aspect of, what was happening. And we've all heard about smart buildings and, smart technologies being integrated into buildings. I think what we're seeing is that is now fast forwarded, and we're going to start seeing smart technologies become available in the next three or 4 months. It's like this, medical miracle of a vaccine in 3 months. We're going to see smart technologies that we've never heard of that actually are going to be available. And given that these issues are global, I think scale is going to happen so fast that we're going to see the prices drive down, just like we saw on, the photovoltaics, just like we saw on the LED lights. They were expensive at first. Now they're cheaper than incandescent. It's going to be the same thing with a lot of these touchless technologies, various HVAC systems, and other kinds of smart technology systems for buildings.
Thank you. Thank you. So I have another question. We have a few more minutes, which I throw out to all of you because I'm interested in everyone's responses. Over the last week or so, I've been reading articles in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, that are really sort of focused on a growing, at least they claim it looks like a growing trend that would reverse the last sort of 30 years of urbanization. When I first came to New York in the 70s, the city was almost broke. The crime rate was peaking out, drugs, garbage. I loved the city back then because the music scene was really good. But all these other things were freaking out my bosses and the generation above me, and they started migrating to the suburbs. And these articles that I'm reading are picking up on a similar trend. Now, I don't know if they're sort of biased in who they're talking to and so forth, but they're almost saying maybe the pandemic is an inflection point, very much like, the crime and fiscal lack of discipline of big cities back in the 70s was an inflection point. I'd love to hear your ideas. Anyone who would like to chip in on that.
So I'll start. Look, I think I go back to my comment earlier about the virus phase and the post-virus phase. In the virus phase, urban areas have a challenge. We talked about public transportation. There are going to be appropriate government regulations about occupancy. We've had demonstrations recently. So I think the virus phase is clearly a challenge. I continue to believe after the virus is gone and a lot of the safety issues that we've been talking about are less important, I continue to believe in the attractiveness and in the importance of our urban areas. I think in particularly young talent workers want to live in our country's cities. They want to live in cities all over the world. They want to be with each other. They want all the social experiences. They want the culture. They want the excitement of the city. And I think that's not going to change. I think that's where they want to go. And so I believe in the cities long term, and I think the employers will chase the talent into the cities, and the cities will continue to be an important location for many of our country's leading employers.
Tom, I would just add to that. I do think we're going to see a little bit of dip during this reopening, but cities are interesting because of the people and because of the culture. And so we need to make sure that our interesting retailers continue to make these streets vibrant. That's a huge part of the attraction and why young people, of course, they want to live close to the amenities of their lives, but the amenities of their lives are their jobs. but it is also their friends. It's where they want to spend time. It's these interesting retailers that make our neighborhoods, that make our communities so special. And we need to do all we can to make sure this group can make it through the hump. And so the work that we're doing with the federal government, I agree with you, John, the work that the Real Estate Roundtable is doing to make sure that these programs really are there to help support these retailers are what will make these cities continue to be so attractive.
I just add that the point that if you take a look at what's gone on in Dubai over the last 30 years, I mean, you know, there's probably the #1 city in the world today. And I think if you said that comment in Dubai, I don't think they did shake their leg at all and be concerned about it. And I wouldn't either. I think at the end of the day, we're going through a pandemic. Yes, it is absolutely, you know, it's overwhelming. It's unheard of. Nobody ever thought this would happen. And I also think the voice of the millennials right now, of that age of, you know, 28 to 38 years old, are the ones that are speaking loudly right now. And they're the ones, I think, generally speaking, will raise a family, move back to the community in some respects. But once you start introducing traffic and various other types of challenges that go on with that urbanization, that's why people are moving back into the city over the last decade or so. And I think what this will do will allow us an opportunity. How do we make the city, the urban environment, cleaner, safer, okay, and more livable than we have in the past? So I think this is going to be an upgrade for the urban areas and an opportunity for them to differentiate themselves in a very, very thoughtful way. And lastly, and I do agree with Owen, and I think it's an excellent point, I think Americans today really, I think, put a high priority on cultural experiences. In our cities of New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Boston, all these great cities around the country, you couldn't get a better cultural experience anywhere in the world than we have right here. And I think that's what people are learning for. They really want to be educated and they enjoy that intellectual curiosity and that experience.
Well,
Thank you all.
Just to kind of cap it off, I totally agree with everyone else about cities. But as John said, I think there is such an opportunity because it's been a moment to step back and to think about the parts we love and the parts that are challenging. And I think that, you know, we are creating a vaccine in 3 months on this thing. We can do whatever we want to do. We can fix the traffic. We can fix what's going on the subways. We can fix what's happening with our buildings. I think that we all ought to, you know, really realize that these problems aren't insurmountable. We're just coming through an almost insurmountable challenge, and we're getting to the other side. And let's be just as courageous with all the other challenges and make our cities fantastic.
A great way of summarizing. Thank you, Diane. Now, we have about 5 minutes left, which we don't need to use. Does anybody have a question which I haven't asked that they think there should be an answer for on this panel? Okay, if not, then really appreciate all of you making the time to be here. And the Real Estate Roundtable is going to continue to work hard in its mission in DC to protect not just the interests of our industry, but the interests of all America, because they are the same. And thank you again.